Welcome to Relationships Q&A with Alan Robarge. I'm a psychotherapist and a relationship coach. Thanks for joining me. If you're looking for practical coaching conversations about real relationships, then you're in the right place. I take questions from members of our online community called Improve Your Relationships. And for the next half hour, let's brainstorm. Let's look at these questions from different angles, exploring our possibilities. We're not looking for one right answer. We're looking at what we can learn. The goal is to inspire you and get you thinking about your relationships. All our questions together point towards one universal question. We're all trying to figure out the same thing. How do relationships work? Well, we have a challenging question for episode number 2. You're joining us episode number 2. Let's jump into this question. It's really challenging. It's going to be hard to answer this. The question is, should I stay or should I go? And it's specific to a relationship. Should I stay in the relationship? Should I leave this relationship? Now, of course, my simple answer is I don't know. How do I know? I have no idea of the circumstances, the situation, the history, the skills, the trust that has been eroded, the possibility to rebuild, the possibility for a new chapter. I really don't know. So, of course, I cannot answer that for you specifically, but we can explore some of the common circular thinking, the cyclical thinking, the getting stuck, looping. And so the first layer, the first place of focus is not so much coming up with the answer of concluding, yes, I'm going to stay, or no, I'm going to leave. The first thing to focus is to look at the degree of confusion and the looping thought process between stay, go, stay, go, stay, go. And this creates a mind, creates a frenetic mind. And it's based upon doubt, and it's based upon fear, and it's based upon not having conviction and an inability to make a choice in your best interest to move your life forward. And let's look at some of these thoughts, certain types of thinking that hook us back into this looping, this cyclical, confused state of stay, go, stay, or leave. And one of those has to do with nostalgia. And we might think of it also a bit of romance, romantic idealization. And this comes into play when you allow yourself, if you're trying to make a practical, pragmatic, logical, really get down to the core decision-making process, are you going to stay or go? Usually we can distract ourselves from actually having or needing to follow through with a choice, and we start getting sucked into the nostalgia of the relationship. That time when we went to the beach, and that time when we celebrated the birthday, and that one very special thing happened, and we have these photographs of our time together, and we have our own quirky, idiosyncratic way of speaking, our kind of insider language, our jokes, our music. And when we start to bring in any one or any number of those ideas, it activates nostalgia, an idealization of the relationship, and we confuse ourselves in that place. We distract ourselves with that kind of nostalgia. Now, before I continue, I do want to acknowledge that I will answer this question and I will contribute information here. My point of view does have a bias. And my bias is informed that if you're even listening to this podcast and listening to me, that you have found me through a body of information based upon attachment injuries and attachment trauma, and entering insecurely attached relationship where there are push, pull, distancer, pursuer, come here, go away, and that there has been most probably some kind of chronic ongoing anxiety, uncertainty, groundlessness, tension, disappointment, maybe even dysfunction and toxic relating. And you have done this for months or years or many years. And then you're coming into the question, should I stay or should I go? So my bias is informed with the assumption that you are operating in and or have some unintegrated attachment trauma that you are aware of, that you've attempted to work through, and this relationship, there has been this ongoing undermining of trust and an eroding of trust. So my bias errs on the side of saying it's okay if you end this relationship. And where that bias comes from is that there are a lot of fantasy tactics, diversion tactics, ways of thinking that distort reality. And we use a false loyalty to convince ourselves to stay in relationships that we know are not working. And chances are that if you have found me and my work and this podcast, that you have already attempted, you have given yourself a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance. You have bought yourself time to figure out, well, maybe let's just wait and see this period of time. Let's wait until this kid graduates. Let's wait until we get through this transition of the holidays. And before you know it, 5 years has gone by. And maybe it's only 5 months. But it's this kind of thinking that is able to dismiss the intensity, the reality, the call to action that must take place. And for many of us who have an attachment injury, an unintegrated attachment trauma, we are very much trained and have a propensity, if that's the right word. We have the ability to ignore the call to action. So because of this, and because of my role of how I work with clients, I err on the side of you really have to convince yourself that you're not playing these particular fantasy games and distorting reality in service of buying yourself time because you don't know how to end. So many people who get stuck in the place of should I stay, should I go, should I stay, should I go? Oftentimes what's happening is that neither partner knows how to end. You don't have skills. You don't have the ability to follow through. And you get stuck in the nostalgia. You get stuck in the romance. You get stuck distorting the reality and idealizing the future. And you get stuck being in relationship with the potential and the hope of what you want it to be, instead of being able to honestly say, this is what it is. I have enough information and evidence, just done. And even though you know that you're done, you're still not following through and making it happen. Now, sometimes we want our partner to be the one who cuts it off. And we're waiting and waiting. And then at the same time, if that happens, then we have to manage our own feelings of rejection. And sometimes that activates an abandonment wound. And then we unravel. And then it's exacerbated. Our attachment injury potentially is linked to this feeling of being abandoned, being rejected. And so you have two adults who are unable to create an adult ending where there's a natural progression, a clean break, a simplicity to end, just end. That's what we need to do. Relationships end. There's no surprise about that. Your relationships will end. There is no surprise about that. This is what it means to be a human being. But we forget that. And we sign up for this fantasy of forever. And so then when we are confronted with the disappointment of impermanence, and also the impersonal aspect of impermanence, things just end, and that might include your relationship. And when it does, we act all surprised, and our brain goes nuts, and our mind starts to get agitated, and our nervous system, we feel, this strong, crushing loss. Or we feel a profound, strong compulsion that we must get back together. We must salvage the relationship. And so much of this is that we're having a profound reaction against the realities of impermanence. We cannot, if you have an attachment injury, chances are you cannot accept, you cannot fathom, you are not okay with just the idea of endings. Relationships end. And that is a skill. That just alone to fully, not only intellectually know that or consciously know that, but to be able to trust that when it is time to end an adult relationship, you are going to be able to end. And you can recover and you can move on with your life. And what happens for many of us who have had some history of being ignored, being neglected, being abandoned in some way, being rejected by very significant, important people in your life, usually coming from childhood, but it doesn't have to be. It could be, some emotionally traumatic experience in your adult relationships. But if you have that history and it is also unintegrated where you have not made peace with that, then as much as you're internally avoiding your own memory, your own feeling states around some rejection or abandonment in your past, you're going to potentially even subconsciously, you might not even know that you're doing this, but you're going to be very, very averse. You're going to push hard and push away from having to feel those type of feelings and even letting in the knowing that relationships can end. Because for your mind, you equate it into devastation. And it gets equated into either you're being rejected and abandoned, or here's the other one. You think that if you end, you are abandoning the other person. You're rejecting the other person. And that's another one of those wonderful little ideas that hook you back in. And if you just pay attention to your language, oftentimes the language is very extreme. You know, like, well, what about the other person? They're going to be devastated. They're not going to be able to function. They're you know, this is going to make their whole life fall apart. And potentially that's true. You know, I don't know your partner. And if that happens, you know, yes, people fall apart. But at least that is not the deciding factor to stay, because people don't have the skill to manage the grief and know how to end. We oftentimes are very loyal, and we want to protect not only ourselves from feeling the history of rejection and abandonment, and that if we are projecting that onto a partner, that if we end, we might think that, well, that means we're rejecting and abandoning the partner. And we would not wish that level of hurt onto another person, because that's our deepest hurt. We know that very intimately. And it is then a kind of act of love where we want to spare our partner. But you see, this is the faulty thinking. This is faulty thinking. And I will repeat it. This is faulty thinking. The reason it's faulty is that you are not rejecting a partner and you are not abandoning a partner. If you end with consciousness, if you end with intention, if you end with purpose, if you end with loving kindness, if you end with presence, and if you're just an all-around decent person, that's not rejection. That's an adult who's inviting another adult to end a relationship. And the challenge here is to end well. And I'm assuming, and I could get this wrong, but I'm assuming that you have a history where when you end, it doesn't go really that well. And it might be full of drama and anger and fighting and tension and hurt feelings, or break up, get back together, break up, get back together. I once had a friend who I asked him, I said, how do you end relationships? And his answer was like a cat in a washing machine on the spin cycle. So if you get that image, you know, some of us really end poorly. So to ask the question, should I stay or should I go? Oftentimes what's underneath that is, how do I work with this perpetuating my own confusion and staying in a state of looping in my mind around confusion? And then also linked to the question, should I stay or should I go? We have to look at some of the very slippery, tricky ways that our mind tries to pull us into that confusion. One of them is the nostalgia and the romance. Another one is what we've already said as well, which is around this fear of being rejected, fear of activating your own abandonment wound, or projecting that onto a partner and then believing that you are hurting them to the degree to which you have been hurt in your past. So if you need to leave a relationship, you need to think about how can you do it from your adult self. Because oftentimes what's happening is we do not have a resource here because we, in a way, regress or we link back to a younger developmental state where we were not able to fully experience a secure relationship that would have planted the seeds and we could have internalized a solid experience, a solid essence of relationship is reliable. And if you had that, then you take that with, and endings are not that scary. Because even though you're ending, you still have the internalized core sense that the other person was reliable, the relationship is reliable, and you take the love that you've shared and you still benefit from the feeling of security and the feeling of warmth and the feeling of connection. And so people who have had a history of securely attached relationships, again, usually in their family or in their adult life, they have corrective experiences and they grow and mature and they have relationships that are really healthy and helpful for them. When this happens, they internalize. When this happens for us, we internalize this foundational sense that everything is okay, and this person loves me, and I love this person, and it's not the end of the world if we can't make this work in a partnership, because we still have internalized within us is this sense of a reliable knowing, a reliable security, a reliable warmth. And that even if we're not actively in relationship, the relationship is ended and we move on with our lives, we part ways, we go different things, we still have within us that strong sense of being connected. And that we know that how we're going to be connected is changing and shifting. But the essence of the connection, we take that with. Now, if you have an attachment injury or attachment trauma, an attachment wound, especially if it is still unhealed and unintegrated, and you have not been afforded through your life history and your experiences in childhood, you never quite integrated that feeling or internalized the experience that I'm referring to, where you live with that essence of connection and that you take it with wherever you go, and you don't literally need to be with the person. You don't literally need to be in relationship with the person where this came from. Because once it's internalized, it's yours. But if you have had some emotional developmental trauma, attachment injuries that you're still working out in your life, it's very possible you don't have this foundational sense, this felt sense, this grounded place of secure knowing that you are still okay and you're still connected, even if you're not technically in relationship. And what happens is that for many of us who don't have that, we instead experience an absence, an emptiness, a haunting echo of disconnect. And that's what we are frightened of. And that is what is reoccurring. And that is what gets provoked when we contemplate ending a relationship. So from a clear, logical, prudent place and just being honest with ourselves, we can assess a situation. Should I stay or should I go? Well, I'm ready to go. I'm done. Let's just go. I'm done. I know it's over. The partner knows it's over. Yep. That's why, I revisited this idea, 422 times. It's just time to end. So we can have the clarity that we know it needs to end. But if we have this history where there is not an internalized foundational sense, the essence, where we have been able to incorporate into our own being a comforting sense of many of it, where that even though when relationships end, we're still connected, even when we go out into the world and we're doing our own thing and we're not technically in relationship anymore, we're still connected. And for many of us who have attachment injuries and attachment trauma, we are lacking this feeling of the security around an ongoing connection with those who we have loved in the past. And instead, what is in that place, it's a kind of emptiness, an absence that we experience as a provocative, haunting echo of longing. And that's where our neediness comes from. And that's where this real painful yearning. And usually, again, full circle, everything I said from the beginning here, that there are all these different ways that we get sucked back into the looping confusion of stay, go, stay, go, stay, go. And this last point is that the actual feeling of the absence, the emptiness, the longing, the provocative yearning, where there should have been, or we're working towards internalizing a different sense of security and connection with others so that we can build up to rely on and feel a sense of strength even when we're not actually in relationship. But if we don't have that, we are going to bump up against that emptiness, that really painful place. And it is going to derail our prudent, logical mind, and it's going to derail our ability to take action and move forward. And we are not going to be able to see clearly anymore, because now all of a sudden we're imploding around the very painful place of noticing we have not internalized some sense of a ongoing essence or an ongoing connection with some loved ones from the past. And instead, what we get is a profound groundlessness, a very provocative uncertainty that I'm not okay if I'm not connected to this person. I'm not okay if we're not in relationship. I'm going to be cast out into the great abyss, the great wasteland. I will be lost in my longing and in my emptiness and in my loneliness. And if you just even hear the words I'm using right now, oh my gosh, I cannot end this relationship. It's too much. So instead, I need to get sucked back into my own confusion, and I just need to keep looping. And should I stay or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? And so maybe you need to put that on hold, the actual ending of a relationship, or actually deciding if you're going to stay or go, and maybe take a little diversion, do a chapter of healing work, some self-directed healing work around how can you comfort yourself and learn how to be in relationship when that absence, when that haunting emptiness activates, that it's not going to devastate you as much, and it's not going to be as provocative as much. Now, chances are you might not be able just to think yourself through it. You'll find all of a sudden, you're spiraling down into it, and it's very, very painful, and you're going to feel lost. But you begin by setting the intention. And let me just repeat this point. Maybe instead of getting stuck so overly focused on stay, go, perhaps you might need to take a break and create a chapter of self-directed healing work around, can you begin to change your relationship with this place of absence and this haunting loneliness and the feeling of not having any security? The moment that you end this relationship, that's what gets activated. And usually that is linked to your attachment trauma. And so much of that is going to link to some history of unresolved grief of how this got set up in your life. So I hope that this was helpful. It's a really challenging question. And many of us get stuck here for years. And we find ourselves in a unsatisfying relationship and unable to end. And we just keep using these different ways of thinking to suck ourselves back into it. So painful stuff. I hope that this was helpful. You've been listening to Relationships Q&A with Alan Robarge, where we talk about relationships because emotional connections matter. All questions come members of the Improve Your Relationships community. To learn more about membership, go to alanrobarge.com/community. Thank you for listening.